Today I tried something I've never done before on a bar cabinet, and it didn't exactly go according to plan. This project started out like many of my others, with measuring, examining, measuring, more examining, and more measuring. Really getting to know the material. Well, maybe not that much. It's this one. It's this one. Thanks, Matt. Anyway, once I have chosen the boards for this project, I get them roughly marked up and over to the miter saw to get them cut to length. I also took the time to label all my pieces. It may seem a little over the top right now, but trust me, it'll all make a lot more sense later in the build. Okay, that's all the cabinet pieces milled up. They're not to final thickness yet, but I'm gonna let them acclimate a little bit. I did take a decent amount of material off of these, so we're gonna let these sit for a couple days, come back and get them to final dimension. And while I was working on this project, the shop got a big upgrade. All right, it's the next day. These boards have had a chance to rest overnight. Now I'm gonna head back over to the planer, get them to final thickness, head over to the table saw to get them to final width, and start making some panels. Like I mentioned at the start, this build is for a bar cabinet that's going in the hallway between my living room and the kitchen. Up until now, all my wine and whiskey has just been crammed into a cabinet next to the fridge. Functional? Sure, but not exactly exciting. So I figured it was time to give that storage a bit of an upgrade. Like most of my house projects, I wanted to challenge myself by trying something new in this build. Every project is kind of an experiment for me. It's how I grow as a woodworker, test out new ideas, and see what I might eventually use in client pieces. Now, since I'm a glutton for punishment, I didn't just pick one new technique. I decided to tackle two. You've probably seen Mark do a big epoxy pour before, and if you haven't, definitely go check out his video after this. But this was my first time trying one on a large scale. On top of that, I wanted to dive into bent lamination for the first time, building an arched leg design for the base of this cabinet. And here's the thing. New techniques usually come with new mistakes. Let's just say I almost made a really big one later in the build. But that's part of the adventure, right? When you're building one-of-a-kind pieces of furniture, the process and the surprises are half the fun. So I've got my cabinet pieces laid out on the bench one more time before we head over to the table saw to cut everything to length, because I'm trying to accomplish the waterfall effect across at least the top three sides, or the right, the top, and the left. The bottom side doesn't matter as much because it's going to be covered by the base and you won't see it. I have to be aware of how I cut these boards since I didn't make this as one long panel. I have to make sure that I'm taking the same amount of material out of each of these individual panels in order to keep that waterfall effect across the entire cabinet. I've got some defects that I can cut out, which I knew about. And then there's a couple others that are gonna have to get filled because they'll be included in the final piece. But those ones I knew about, and I'm not too worried about it. That's why it was so important to label every piece when I was rough cutting at the chop saw. I needed them to stay in the same exact order and orientation when I glued up the panels. Otherwise, I'd lose that continuous grain wrapping all the way around the whole cabinet. And that grain flow is one of those little details that really makes a piece feel intentional. While I'm cutting these dominoes, you can probably see just how much labeling I did on these boards. It looks like alphabet soup exploded across the pieces, but it was the only way for me to keep track of where everything needed to go and make sure the right parts got glued together. Okay, so I just completed the first of a few dry fits for this bar cabinet, but now I have to start marking for the dados that are going to house the divider and some of the wine divider pieces inside the cabinet. I want to lay those out before I do the final glue up because I need to do all these dado cuts on the table saw, and once this is glued together, I obviously can't run these through the table saw. I've lost track as to how many times I've actually dry fit this whole assembly together at this point, but it's time to take it apart again, do a little bit of sanding, and finally glue this whole cabinet up. For the miter joints, I decided to use Total Boat Thixo epoxy instead of regular wood glue. Wood glue would have worked just fine, but the epoxy gave me a little bit more working time, just in case I needed to tweak or adjust things during the glue up. And while I'm gluing up the cabinet, I just wanted to give a big shout out to everyone who commented Ton Tavern on Mark's bookshelf video. That really meant a lot, and we're super grateful for everyone watching, commenting, and coming along for the ride with us. I also followed one of my favorite woodworking rules during this glue up. Always use one more clamp than you think you'll need, which somehow always ends up being one less than you actually own. It is indeed square. Gesundheit. Oh, okay. I wonder if that would work on my dishes. Next up was the wine storage. I had already cut and fit the vertical dividers, but now I needed to add strips to act as bottle rests. So here I'm just cutting some small square pieces of stock to size. From the model, I worked out the spacing and cut a piece of plywood to use as a spacer while gluing the strips into the dividers. I use CA glue as a quick clamp while the wood glue sets up, that way I can keep moving on without needing to clamp each strip. Then it was just rinse and repeat for the other two dividers, and of course, a quick test with a bottle of wine to make sure my math was right. With that done, it's time to move on to the base. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'm trying two new techniques on this build, one of them being bent lamination. The reason why I wanted to try bent lamination is I wanted to find a way to introduce curves into my design. Coming from an engineering design background, my goal was generally centered around how a part or system was going to function. So I wanted to focus more on the form of this piece first, then work backwards to get the function and figure out how it was all going to fit together. The two sides of the base that make up the legs will be broken into three pieces, two legs and the arch that will join them together. Right now I'm prepping the two straight legs because the final width of these legs will determine the width of my arch. Even though I'm going to work some magic to make the wood bend, it is still easier to modify a straight and square piece of wood versus a curved one. The dominoes are totally optional here, but it makes alignment a lot easier and keeps my leg blanks nice and square during glue up. Again, thinking of form first in this project, I wanted to keep the larger footprint for the bottom half of the leg, as that will be in contact with the ground and supporting the weight of the cabinet. In order to do that, we need to head to the table saw. But first, that's better. So I decided to lighten the look of the rest of the leg, and as a result, the arch, to take away from the chunkiness of the leg. And yes, chunkiness is the technical term. Now you're probably thinking, Matt, wood is solid, it can't bend. Well, true, we can do a few things to the wood to help it loosen up a little bit. Okay, just a quick update because I've been doing a lot of different things throughout the build, but so far I've got the straight portions of the legs all done. I've got all the strips for the arches cut. I did just try to do a pre-bend with the strips dry. Ran into a couple of issues. I ended up cracking one piece. So what I think I'm going to do is dunk all these pieces in water, let them soften up a little bit, and then put them in the bending form to get that pre-bend on it, and then I'll be able to do a full glue up. Even though this wasn't the final glue up, it was still surprisingly stressful. Soaking and pre-bending these strips ahead of time is a total game changer. Once they dry, they'll hold some of the curve, which makes the real glue up way easier. And I won't be wrestling the outer form like I did during this step. I'll let these strips sit in the form for a couple days, and then I'll take them out and get ready for the real glue up. Okay, it's glue up day. I've got my epoxy over there. I'm about to mix some of that up, and wish me luck. While I'm gluing what feels like a million strips of wood, I just want to say, thanks for watching our videos. We love bringing the builds to life and sharing the process with you. If you're enjoying the journey, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We drop a new video every month, and we'd love to have you along for the next one. Alright, let's get back to the build and see if I manage to not cover everything in epoxy. That is stuck. That is still kind of sticky.
That's what she said.
But it held its shape. It's an arch. For first time on bent lamination, or for first time doing bent lamination, I am quite pleased with that. I'll probably let this fully cure, The next thing to do would be to actually use my molds again, clamp it, and then run it through the table saw to get that square so that it pairs up with the legs nice and square. Not bad. So like I said, I thought I would just clamp the arch back onto the form and cut it at the table saw. Well, not really. Some of you may have already noticed the flaw in my plan, but for those who haven't noticed yet, keep watching. My plan had one fatal flaw. The front end went fine. Arch is in the form, no problem. My form is riding along the fence. This end cuts off, no problem, but my form gets cut off before I get to my other end, so I lose my reference surface. I found that out as the blade was touching, so luckily it's still square, but I have to figure out how I'm gonna make this cut. I probably have to use the whole form so that I have a reference edge on the back end too. But I think I can go over to the miter saw and clean this up and I should be fine. But definitely learned my lesson for the next one. That works so much better. It may need some fine tuning once I get it out of the clamps, but I can do that with some sandpaper on a flat surface. So let's get this one out of clamps, clean it up, and see what it looks like. So major catastrophe avoided, and I managed to not destroy my arch or myself. To quote Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Though this was not as drastic as being punched in the face, it still threw a bit of a wrench into the build. But after regrouping and a little bit of brainstorming, I was able to adapt and move on with the project. So I brought this arch over to the bench to show you where I need to do some more cleanup. If you look closely here, you can see that I have a gap on this left edge and my right edge is touching. If I were to attach the bottoms of my legs to this arch right now, my legs would be angled inwards and not straight up and down. So I need to clean up this area here on both sides of the arch in order to get my leg to be perpendicular with the ground. So what I'm going to do is take my contractor pencil here and just run it flat along the plywood and create a mark all the way across on both sides. So now I'm going to take this over to the bandsaw, get really close to my line, and then come back to this piece of plywood, put some sandpaper on this surface, and then sand it smooth to my line. So I spent a few minutes off camera getting my clamping situation figured out here for these legs, and I think I've come up with a good way to get this glue up done. First thing I did was cut a plywood spacer to keep my legs parallel during the glue up. That will prevent them from wanting to either bow out or bow in during glue up. So I've got that spacer clamped between the legs right now. Then I have a couple of bar clamps set up too. Two of them are used to sandwich the base piece of plywood that I have to keep everything flat, referenced up against my MDF here. That will give me a solid backer for my legs to press up against as I'm applying pressure from the center of the arch to close up the joints between the legs and the arch. All I'm really hoping for is that I have clean, tight seams between my arches and my legs. It's really important to do a dry test, essentially, when you have a complicated glue up like this, because the last thing you want to be doing is running around your shop for clamps or seams aren't closing up properly and you've got glue drying on you pretty quickly. So it's really important to do a setup like this so that your real glue up goes smoothly. I'm curious, do you like it when I talk through my thought process on a build, or are you more interested in just watching me build it? If you like me talking about the thought process, comment process. And if you want me to just build, comment just build it. I find that talking through a problem helps me get to a solution quicker than trying to think about it just in my head. I'll either talk to myself, guys, I swear I'm not crazy, or talk to my brothers or other craftspeople, which may still result in them calling me crazy by the end of the conversation, but that's beside the point. To To tie the base together, I'm adding stretchers across the front and the back. I added a gentle curve to the stretchers to again soften the overall look of the piece. To make sure I have a uniform curve across each stretcher, I traced a line onto one of the stretchers, then attached the other stretcher to it with the tried and true blue tape and CA glue trick. That way I'm only following one line on the bandsaw and the curves on the stretchers will be uniform across each piece. Then with a little cleanup at the spindle sander, these stretchers are ready for assembly. I have since upgraded to double-sided tape for these kinds of applications, but watch out! Whoa, it was like the tape ball was going to come out of the screen and hit me. That was close. Anyway, this is the last glue up of the entire build, which is awesome because I can finally start to see how the whole piece will look once fully assembled. It's one thing to look at the model on the computer, but it's another to see it in real life. I can never get the actual sense of scale of a piece until I build it in the shop. The cabinet glue-up was less stressful than that. Well, it's over now, Matt, but you can't go take a break. Hey, where are you going? Oh, there you are. Time to stain the base. Oh boy. That audible "oh boy" you just heard was me realizing that once I start staining this base black, it will be very difficult for me to reverse it. So here goes nothing. That's another thing about trying something new on a project. You have no idea what the outcome is going to be until you try it. I had a sense of what it was going to look like since staining ash black is nothing new in woodworking, but when several hours of work can be undone in 15 minutes, you take a second to gather yourself. In the end, I'm super happy with the black stain and it fits really well into the look of the final piece. Had you fooled there for a second, didn't I? Just kidding, you knew it was me. Anyway, it's time to start working on the door. I'm using a combination of black epoxy and an old growth cherry slab that I have. Off camera, I used some scrap plywood to make a frame that's roughly the same size as each of my door panels, and I'm gonna move it around the slab to see which combination of wood and epoxy is gonna look the best for this cabinet. This piece of cherry actually comes with a bit of a backstory. When I first started building furniture for clients, a friend of mine asked me to make a bench as a gift for his dad. But there was a twist. He wanted it built from cherry slabs that his father and his uncle had cut down decades ago on their family property. That's one of the things I love most about custom furniture. Every piece has its own story. And now, I get to connect that story from one of my very first projects to this one. Off camera, I made a mold from MDF and wrapped it in Tyvek tape. Then I sealed all the corners with caulk and gave the whole mold a coat of paste wax. If you'd like to see a full video of how we make our molds or how I made the bending form for this build, let us know in the comments. I also added a slight chamfer to the slab so the corner does not interfere with the caulk line that I just added to the mold. Okay, according to my napkin math, I need 163 fluid ounces of epoxy to fill that form. This holds 64 ounces, so I'm gonna start with that. This epoxy is the deep pour epoxy, so I have a lot of working time, so if I need to mix up another batch or two, I'll have plenty of time to do that. So we're gonna start with 64 and see how that goes. It was definitely nice that Mark had just finished up a big epoxy pour because I may have reached out to him once or twice.
No leaks so far.
While I was getting everything set up. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't also take a look at his epoxy table video for reference. But honestly, it was nice having those resources. It reduced any chances of me running into any potentially messy mistakes. Okay, this pour is done. Nothing's leaking, which is awesome. And my math ended up being pretty good. I estimated that I needed 163 fluid ounces of epoxy to fill this mold and ended up using about 160. I did mix up more than that. I mixed up probably about 200 fluid ounces of epoxy, which was definitely more than I needed. But I was able to overflow this entire mold with that extra and even had enough left to make some coasters. So although my garage is heated, it's only about 64 degrees in here. So this is probably gonna take 4, maybe even 5 days to fully set up. I'm gonna give it a little bit of extra time just to be safe, but it should be done in about 4 to 5 days. I think I let the epoxy sit for 7 days in the mold since I was working on some other parts of the build, but time to turn this massive chunk of epoxy and wood into some one-of-a-kind doors. I'm a big fan of symmetry and I try to work it into my builds whenever I can. For the doors on this piece, I'm doing that by slicing the slab in half and opening it like a book, a technique fittingly called book matching. That leaves me with 2 mirror image panels, and after some cleanup and a lot of polishing, they'll draw the eye and become a focal point of the cabinet. The book match turned out really nicely, and here I'm just checking for any voids in the epoxy that might need fixing. Luckily, everything looked good, so I can head straight to the planer to clean up those bandsaw marks. I know this isn't the planer, but you'll have to use your imagination since I did not turn on the camera. Instead, I'm now cutting my doors to their final size at the table saw. So I've got my doors cut to their final dimension. I've got this one set up in the case and held in place with the cards here. But now it's time to cut the door hinges, or the holes for the door hinges, into these doors. However, these are one-of-a-kind doors. I can't go and just get some more lumber and pour the epoxy again and make these doors again because I don't have another slab that looks like this one. So I'm gonna take a scrap of walnut plywood that I have on hand, cut it to the right size of the door, and then install the hinges on this first, make sure it fits, get it all adjusted, and then I'll cut the final holes into the doors. All right, I just spent a few minutes getting my blank scrap piece of plywood set up with the hinges. As you can see, I actually made a mistake. I spaced the hinge too far into the door, which didn't allow the hinge to open fully. So I had to drill them again, but I got this fit into the cabinet and made sure that everything worked. So what I did after that is I used that same spacing, made myself a template that will get attached to the actual doors. I'll head back over to the drill press and drill the holes for final mounting. Remember all that sanding and polishing I just mentioned? Cue the montage. Two days of sanding and polishing summarized in 20 seconds. Time to bring this whole cabinet together. Growing up, my parents always encouraged my brothers and I to try new things, sports, hobbies, or whatever caught our interest. That mindset stuck with me, and I bring it into the shop every day. With this build, I had no idea how the bent lamination or epoxy pour would turn out, but I wouldn't have learned without trying. In the end, it worked out, and now I've got new skills for future projects. So if there's something you've been wanting to try, just go for it. Now, time to sit back, pour a drink, and enjoy. Responsibly, of course. And as always, use a coaster. Cheers.